You're listening to the Labor Notes Podcast, the weekly show from Labor Notes on rank and file news and organizing strategies. We're your pod co-hosts, Natasha Elena Ullman
and Danielle Smith. Thanks so much for listening in on your Friday morning commute or whenever and wherever you listen from. Today, we're inviting you to join us in the Stewards Corner.
Ooh, sounds cozy. Where's that?
Well, okay, it's not exactly a physical place, at least not yet. But it is the name of a series on our website and in our monthly magazine, where it's been running since the 1980s. It's kind of part advice, part how-to column for shop stewards, who are often on the front lines of building rank-and-file power in our unions. But the advice is pretty useful for anyone trying to organize their coworkers and fight the boss, so even if you aren't officially a shop steward, you should definitely stick around.
Yeah, we've got our coworker Joe DeManuelle-Hall, who runs our workshop series for stewards, on with us here today to talk about some of those stewarding tools that can also help organize the shop floor. And that's just as well, because this month's Stewards Workshop, which Joe will be facilitating on May 28th, is on the topic of thinking like an organizer. Thanks for being here today, Joe.
Great to be here. Excited to talk with you all about this.
Definitely. And I think it's great to talk explicitly about organizing being fundamental to the role of being a steward, because there's this tendency to treat stewards like little lawyers enforcing the contract and dealing with grievances, or even like a concierge service for other union members. Joe, you've run Thinking Like an Organizer as one of the recurring topics in our monthly stewards workshops. What made you want to explore this topic particularly?
Yeah, so obviously, like you said, a big part of what stewards work on is contract enforcement and grievance handling. And that's really important. And it's a big piece of what we talk about, of the resources that we provide for people in books and articles. And it's a lot of what stewards learn about when they're being taught about how to be stewards. But there's a big piece of it that I think is often missing or is treated as secondary, which is really important to building union power on the shop floor. And that's the role of stewards as the face of the union in the workplace, as the frontline representatives of the union, the people who coworkers are seeing every day at work. For a lot of people, the steward is the union, quote unquote, the closest that they're going to see to that. So a big part of what stewards are doing and learning about is contract enforcement, grievance handling, these types of things. And union steward trainings, what people get from their union when they're signing up to be a steward, usually spend a lot of time on topics like how to avoid liability in the private sector, for example, avoiding duty of fair representation charges for mishandling grievances, making sure that you're following grievance timelines, maybe covering things like learning your contract or a little bit about the grievance procedure, but they often stop there. And this is a big limitation of steward trainings that I have seen that don't focus enough on the steward as somebody who's supposed to be really building the strength of the union, not just becoming, like Danielle said, an expert on their contract, which they also should be and is also important. But the role of the steward is getting more people involved in the union and building the union on the shop floor, which is something that they're really uniquely situated to do, knowing their coworkers better than anybody else does, knowing the issues better than anybody else does, having those personal relationships that a union rep or a union president, someone else, an officer of the union might not have because they don't have as direct access and as direct continuous access to their coworkers.
So how do we help stewards avoid seeing their role so narrowly?
So part of the way that I think about this is more of a mindset shift than adding a whole different job. Part of the challenge that people experience, I think, being a steward, many of whom, not most of whom, are full-time workers. Maybe if they're receiving any time off the job to do union work, it's often a small amount. The work of building the union, of getting out, getting people more involved in the union, is the first thing that falls by the wayside. Again, if it's treated as a separate task that they do, which makes a lot of sense. It's people aren't at fault for doing that. Your contract says that a grievance has to be filed within a certain number of days from when an issue happens. You got to do that, right? That's something that you need to be able to follow up on, a standard that you need to be able to meet. So the way that I started thinking about it was, how could we integrate this more into the work that people are doing already, rather than as a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and eighth job that they're being expected to do? And my experience of working with union stewards, both through labor notes and my time as a union rep before that, was that people who are experienced, who are good at this job, and even people who are learning this job, have an intuition about how they handle issues when somebody comes to them with a problem. So a coworker comes to them with a problem that they have at work. And in the steward's head, all of these things start firing off. Is this a violation of the contract? Have I heard about this issue before? Have I talked with somebody about it recently? Did it come up at a recent union meeting or a labor management meeting? Have we won a grievance on this before? That kind of thing. Who else do I need to talk to? And instead of treating the organizing problem, the organizing question, as an entirely separate thing, wanted to add one question to that list of questions, which is this an opportunity to get more people involved in the work of the union? Which is a relatively small pivot, or can be a relatively small pivot, but it brings the organizing into the grievance handling piece and brings the project of getting people more involved in the union. If you're familiar with labor notes, the project of bringing people closer to the center of the bullseye into the day-to-day work that people are already doing and have to do and can't avoid.
Can you give us a little taste of what people can expect in the workshop, like practice exercises, case studies, or discussion prompts, things like that?
Sure. So one thing we do in the training is work through some common scenarios stewards might encounter altogether in the workshop, things that I've encountered in my union work, things that I've heard people express. There's one about people not going to a union meeting and the problems that that creates. There's one about a union survey that people aren't responding to. The first one that I really like, because it's simple and common, is where a steward gets called into a meeting with HR and is told there's a pay issue for a member and we're going to fix it, but the resolution isn't great. And then the steward goes back and tells the member what the resolution is. And the question that we talk about is, what were the opportunities here to get more people involved? We break people out, we talk about it, we get some really good responses. Some of the things that people often come up with are ideas like bringing the member into meeting with HR in the first place so they can see how HR operates, sitting down with a member to look over the contract and treat it as an education moment where they can learn what the contract language actually says about what they have a right to, because many members will never have seen that before. Asking the member if they're down to talk to some of their coworkers about the issue to see if other people are having this pay issue and if it's more than just this one person's experience. And I think it really gets people thinking about what else could you do? How could I do this job a little bit differently while still doing it, but also getting more people involved in the work of the union? And what we tell people about it is the worst thing that this person can say is no. That doesn't mean that you don't represent them as a steward. But if you don't take the shot, they don't have the opportunity to step up and do more work.
So, talking about ways to bring in and fire up new members, another stewards tool we wanted to highlight today is something that can help you level up your organizing: requests for information, or RFIs. Can you explain what these are and maybe talk about what kinds of questions come up most often about them in your workshops?
There's a whole universe of information that employers are legally obligated to provide to union stewards, not just during contract negotiations, but during the term of the contract, which the Supreme Court affirmed back in 1967 for private sector workers. That includes information like employee evaluations, interview notes, personnel files, things that would help with grievance investigations and contract enforcement that many members are often pretty surprised they can ask for and have the right to. One of my favorites of these is internal management correspondence, like management communications to HR about an employee or about a policy change. Things which members would expect are secret and hidden behind locked doors, but that you can actually demand and have the right to. And one of the things that I really like about this is you can see people's eyes widening as you're talking with them about it, that people don't know that they have the right to this. It can feel like a superpower. It can feel like introducing people to fire for the first time, even though this is a relatively limited and straightforward right that has all sorts of limitations. And we'll talk about those, I'm sure. But one example of how I've used this in the past is I was a representative in a workplace working with a group of unionized mechanics where every time there was an issue, the frontline supervisor would send a report about what had happened. Say an employee had showed up this late or they had violated this rule, and would send it off to HR, who would then massage it and write it up and present it in a disciplinary form to the member who was being written up. But we were able to request that information, that first communication between the frontline supervisor and HR, to see the unfiltered version of how this was being used. What did they say had happened before somebody who went to HR school got their hands on it and figured out how to weave it through the contractual language to make it look as bad as possible for the member? And it wasn't always a slam dunk, but it would help us, and it would make management show their work, that there's this communication and paper trail where the manager is saying to HR, this is what happened. So if you want to learn the source of a disciplinary write-up coming from HR, you can ask for and get that initial email from the supervisor and the response from HR. You can get the notes about any interviews that they did with members or supervisors or coworkers of the member who is being written up, to get the information that you might need to be able to make your grievance stronger, to determine if they really crossed their T's and dotted their I's in this investigation.
We have a Stewards Corner piece on RFIs that gets even more into the specifics, called File an Information Request with Every Grievance, by the labor attorney Bob Schwartz, who folks may know as the author of The Legal Rights of Union Stewards. We ran that piece in December 2019, and you can read it on labornotes.org. So, Joe, you gave that example about asking for internal management communications. What are some of the other kinds of requests for information we'd want to file for different types of grievances?
There's a lot. There's a great list in the article that Danielle just mentioned. I highly recommend people checking it out. A few of my favorite ones are video recordings. Many workplaces are completely covered in cameras. Every corner is filmed. And that information may be useful to you. Being able to watch a video of the incident to see for yourself what happened could be really useful. Same for things like call recordings. People who work in call centers are recorded all the time. You can get those recordings. You don't have to take management's word for what management says happened in an incident. Things like personnel files, not just of members, but of managers too, which can be really interesting and powerful. If you've got a manager who people are having a lot of problems with, or a manager who you think isn't doing their job as well as they should be, you can request their personnel file. Has this manager been written up in the past for issues where they were harassing a coworker or where they weren't meeting production quotas or anything like that? Can be useful. Things like clock in and clock out data, biometrics, which are extremely common in a lot of workplaces now. People who drive company vehicles, you can request GPS data. You can request the data about braking and accelerating, how fast people were traveling, all of which can be useful in contract enforcement and grievance handling to make the employer show their work, which is a big part of what this is about and what grievance handling is about, is making sure that the employer knows that their decisions are going to be scrutinized. And information requests can be a really powerful tool to make sure that that's happening.
Sounds like a great tool to shift the power dynamic and put management on the defense. You were saying earlier, though, that there are some limitations to RFIs. Could you say more about what they can't really do? And as a part two, what can stewards do if the boss refuses to give them that information or says they can't?
So like many things, employers don't like to follow the rules. Just because something is in your contract doesn't mean the employer will do it. Just because something is in the law doesn't mean the employer will do it. And we're listing out a lot of things here that employers may feel deeply are their domain. What do you mean I have to send you my emails? I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. Is an extremely common response that employers give to requests for information. And just like many union stewards don't know that they have the right to this information, many employers don't know that you have the right to this information and will tell you that you don't. Common responses are, you don't have the right to that, even if you do. You're asking for too much, doesn't matter. You're asking for too much too soon, also doesn't matter. Bob Schwartz does a great job of covering some of the common responses and the legal arguments that courts have found not to hold up. So what mechanisms are there that exist to try and make employers follow the law? One is to file unfair labor practice charges, or the public sector equivalent. Unfair labor practice charges for the U.S. private sector are a mechanism to give a smack on the wrist, really, to employers when they're violating labor law, which this is. A refusal to provide information that has been requested by a union is a violation of labor law. So that's one mechanism. It's not quick. It's not a silver bullet. The NLRB has been underfunded for years and continues to face attacks under the Trump administration at the moment. But it is one mechanism to do that. Another mechanism, as always, you won't be surprised to hear from Labor Notes, is to put more pressure on the employer in different ways. Can you get together a group of people to storm into the boss's office and say, hey, give us the information that we asked for? Or do a picket outside of HR demanding that they provide the information that you've requested and that you have a right for?
Well, those ideas certainly sound like thinking like an organizer. Is there a way for people to stay in the loop if they want to keep up to date on our resources and trainings for stewards?
Definitely. I write up a monthly steward newsletter that lets stewards know about helpful resources and upcoming Labor Notes events. To get on that list, you can join one of the stewards workshops and I'll add you, or you can also email me at joe@labornotes.org.
Thank you so much, Joe. That's our show today. If you found any of that useful, consider supporting our work. It's an especially good time to do so because May is our fundraiser month at Labor Notes. Your contributions can go twice as far if you donate now, thanks to a group of Labor Notes supporters who are ready to match your support up to $11,500. Regular donations are how we sustain this work: the reporting, the workshops, the conferences, and even this podcast. Become a monthly donor or make a one-time donation at labornotes.org/donate. Our next Stewards workshop on the topic of thinking like an organizer will be on May 28th. We also have a couple other workshops, including one on running for union office on May 19th, which Joe is also facilitating, along with our staff organizer, Lisa Hsu. And we've got a special session of what to do when your union breaks your heart for educators on May 20th. You can sign up at labornotes.org/events, where you can also check out some of our in-person events coming up in New Orleans and in the Bay Area. If you're a K-12 educator, consider coming to the UCOR conference in July.
Please rate us or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. If you're listening to us on Podbean at labornotespodcast.podbean.com, download our episode. The Labor Notes podcast is produced by Natasha Elena Ullman, Sindhu Sundar, and myself. Our title music was written and performed by Labor Notes labor climate organizer Keith Brower Brown. See you next week. Solidarity, y'all.